Bergson and the Holographic Theory of Mind. Part 82 on McGilchrist, or McGilchrist the Bergsonian, or tying philosophy to the fact, and the temporal metaphysic of the right brain and the classic metaphysic of the left brain. Okay, I've been absent from YouTube for a few months. Reading for Pill is still working, however, on various things. Strangely, a young gal at Notre Dame, an intern for the De Gruyter Publishing Company in a dangerous and long journey through cyberspace, discovered this little asteroid in the depth of cyberspace by collapsing the singularity. Strangely enough, self-published by Amazon. So I've written an academic book for her publisher. It's going to be titled The Challenge to AI, Consciousness and Ecological General Intelligence. Probably to be published this December. So that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. It's an academic book. So now to McGilchrist. So Jan McGilchrist, MD, psychiatrist, fellow of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, former neuroimaging researcher at Johns Hopkins, author of, most recently, The Matter with Things. And a couple of years ago, or a few years ago before that, 2019, The Master and His Emissary. And for all practical purposes, a Bergsonian. The Matter with Things is making an impact. Just look at the Amazon reviews. They're totally glowing. Over 100,000 sold, as I understand it. Those two works together comprise 3,000 pages, born of years of research on split brain, left right hemisphere function disorders, hundreds of pages, thousands of references, a tour de force. Per McGilchrist or McG, from now on, no one has disputed him on this aspect. It's just too heavily researched, and it's going to take a bit to dispute him, I suspect. In retrospect, I see somehow I was unaware of McGilchrist. Why? Well, McG himself hits the reason in the video, which I didn't track down again. The left brain, right brain discovery and distinction was initially given great press. The operation was performed initially in the 1950s, I believe. I think Roger Sperry had something to do with it, to relieve epileptic fits. When the connection was severed, the epileptic can function much more normally, a bit more normally. Doesn't have quite the same level of problem. Over the years, any significance to the different functions observed in each hemisphere was tamped down to the point of non-significance. Wiki reflects this. When you look at lateralization of brain function, what you read is the concept of, quote, right-brained, unquote, or left-brained individuals is considered a widespread myth, which oversimplifies the true nature of the brain's cerebral hemispheres. For a recent counterposition, though, see below. We'll look at that. Although certain functions show a degree of lateralization in the brain, with language predominantly processed in the left hemisphere, the spatial and nonverbal reasoning in the right, these functions are not exclusively tied to one hemisphere. So curiously, the recent counterposition is not McGilchrist. The see below is this. The debate as to being right-brained or left-brained has recently been opened anew. This reopening is based on relatively recent neuroscience, which has refined the underlying primary functions of the two sides of the neocortex. In particular, Goldberg's novelty routinization theory posits that the neocortex is right, and the left hemisphere is primarily process cognitively novel and cognitively routine task, respectively. So right likes novel things and left likes routine things. This, of course, does not begin to do justice to McGilchrist's treatment. Again, he would look at that, Goldberg's theory, as oversimplification or tamping down significance. So disclaimer, I have not read the book, 3,000 pages, and it would break my Kindle, and it's like $189 for hard copy. So I'm reacting to a bunch of videos in a 25 video series on the McGilchrist channel on the book. A great friend, finishing her PhD at Oxford and getting to be more an expert on Bergson than me, who did look at it, warns me that Bergson would not be too impressed with McGee's treatment of the brain. So I've yet to really integrate things, but what I have seen makes me want to comment. And the very first thing, which Bergson would love, is this. McGilchrist, with his massive research on hemispheric functions, is one such, at least following Bergson's dictum. Philosophy must be tied to the fact. This in contradistinction to the group of philosophers that, like Bergson, that stay primarily just in the philosophical sphere. McGee was looking at tons of hemispheric lateralization data. So this is McGilchrist on the evolutionary origins of the left-right split. He says, evolutionarily, this is because every living being has to be able to solve a conundrum, which is how to eat and stay alive at the same time. Because in order to catch food, it has to have a very narrow, targeted attention to detail, to a detail, which is what it wants to grab quickly. For example, Rhea's attention is grasping, manipulating. Yet the animal needs to be very precise, very narrow, and have an idea it already knows it wants this thing. So quickly, we see this split is going to be far deeper, more fundamental than routine versus novelty. And he goes on. But if that's the only kind of attention it pays, it will not last very long, because it also has to have some kind of consciousness that's looking out for the whole picture, looking out for predators, looking out for conspecifics, looking out for the animal's own king or the bird's own kin. So these two ways of looking at the world are, number one, a very narrow targeted beam to a detail, that is the left, and a broad, open, sustained, vigilant awareness of the whole picture on the right. Continuing. When you have this narrow beam of attention, what you see is the world made up of tiny bits. They're atomistic. They're taken out of context. Context has been shorn off. They are somehow abstract and lifeless. They're sitting there, passive, relatively certain. Remember, the left hemisphere wants to get something, and get something quickly. So these bits are static little atoms of experience that make no sense on their own. So the left hemisphere says, I've got to make the structure here. I've got to bring to bear a theory on how all this can be mechanized. And so you get into the left hemisphere's view, which is a map or a diagram or a theory about how it believes things are structured. Now, it's interesting because AIs and their GPTs are the quintessence of this distinction. If we look at the GPT, generative pre-trained transformers, GPT-3, GPT-4, etc., the fundamental basis is the vector space, where words are treated as points in a vector space, where each element in the vector, going down the second bullet already, is the probability that the word of that word being related to every other word in the corpus, that is the pile of text it's looking at on the internet. So if you have a corpus of 500 words, each vector has 500 probability elements. So you've got a 500 dimensional space, 500D, not just a 2D pointed there. But you can see in that little vector space picture there that bank is at a point in the vector space that's close to money, where water there is kind of far away from bank or money. That's all, by the way, reflected in that dot product too. When you take the vector dot product of the bank by money, you get 13, and the vector dot product of bank by water is 7. So the larger the value of the dot product, the closer they are in the vector space, which is a useful property. So they're atomistic. They're taken out of context. Context has been shorn off. But note, that's all you have there is these atomistic elements: water, bank, money. So then, like he says, I've got to make the structure here. I've got to bring to bear a theory on how all this can be mechanized or related mechanically. And so then you get things like the attention algorithm, where here's a nice sentence. He swam the river to reach the other bank. Now, we don't want bank to be construed as a bank where you deposit money. But remember those vectors back there. The bank vector and the money, the bank was in the money vector were close together, but not the bank and the water vector. So what do? Well, they take those vectors, the original vectors in their vector space, and just for that sentence, so you'd have 9 vectors there. They take the dot products, etc., relative to that sentence, go through an algorithm to turn them into probability scores. That's normalizing the scores via softmax, and then they weight the original vectors by the new weights. And what you're going to get is something where the vector for bank is now pulled closer to water. And this will help you answer that bottom question there. Why was he swimming to the other bank? Well, ChatGPT is going to tell you to get to the bank of the river. So he's not swimming to the bank to make a deposit, but a bank is a bank that is a dirt pile on the side of a river. That's what it's going to tell you. And this is how they do it. But notice that the mechanistic method of doing that. McGee would say the AI folks are in left brain overdrive. He's not very political, but he made that comment of a certain faction of a political group in the video. Interesting. Anyway, but the right hemisphere sees a completely different picture in which nothing is ever completely separate from anything else. Everything is interconnected. Everything is also flowing and changing all the time. It's never got that stasis that comes from a snapshot. In that picture, everything is in a context, and it's made what it is by that context. So when you rip it out of the context, you've altered it already. That stasis that comes from a snapshot, again, he's talking about the opposite case, the left hemispheric case, which is basically what I've called the classic metaphysic in Bergson, the abstract space of points or positions, where the movement of a cup is simply traveling a trajectory of points, a spatial line of points from position to position. And each point corresponds to an instant in time. And time just becomes another dimension of the abstract space, this series of discrete instants. So in essence, the whole universe of time is a series of, to pick a geometric structure, a vast cube, instantaneous, cube after cube after cube. Each cube falling away as the next cube arrives, never more than one instantaneous cube. Which brings up the question of how each cube is created, but that's another question. Also flowing and changing. So from the right hemisphere, we're talking the temporal metaphysic. Motion is indivisible. It can't be treated as a series of points. That's an infinite regress. The transformation of the universal field itself is indivisible. And that abstract space, the continuum of points and positions, becomes concrete extensity in Bergson's terms, not the abstract continuum of points or positions. So just pointing out the underlying Bergsonian basis here. So he goes on, much of what is expressed, and 90% of it, is the implicit, not the explicit meaning. And this is true, whether we're reading, speaking, or communicating using all kinds of things, the facial expression, the tone of voice, body posture, irony, sarcasm, metaphor, poetic images, myths, and so on. Then he says, but the left hemisphere is just like an autistic dictionary that says, these are the rules, these are the words, I'll put it together. Just like our GPT picture, without any sense of the context in which that thing comes to have meaning. In essence, my brackets are a syntax-directed processor. No semantics is involved, it's simply syntactic rules. We'll see in a second. So actually, the understanding of the meaning of the sentence is more served by the right hemisphere than the left. Remember Chomsky and the syntactic structure. This is basically a syntax-directed processor. It's given the rules. Subject is a sentence is a noun phrase plus a verb phrase. A noun phrase is a determiner plus a noun. So all those rules to break down the sentence or generate the sentence. The man stirred the coffee. So that's the syntactic structure. No semantics involved. At the top of the pyramid there, the S is the idea from our concrete experience of stirring coffee, which has to be expressed via some sort of syntactic structure in this rule. But that coffee stirring is vastly more rich, detailed, and vivid than the sentence itself. Any syntactic string of words, syntactically structured string of words, does not compare to what the actual experience is. That is the right hemisphere. One can see then intuitively how if the right hemisphere isn't functioning too well, you're going to have a difficult time with the words because you can't get to the meaning. You're going to have a difficult time with language, even though the left hemisphere is supposedly more focused on language. So McGilchrist adds, and there are a few other small differences. For the left hemisphere is more interested in quantity, and the right is more interested in things and their qualities. So this entire discussion is a gloss, and a great one, on Bergson's dichotomies. On the classic metaphysics side, abstract space, abstract time, quantity, syntax, intellect. On the temporal metaphysics side, extensity, duration, quality, semantics, intuition, or left and right, as you were. Now I note the first three are the fundamental pieces of the dichotomy. Intellect and intuition was always an implied part of the dichotomy, and I added syntax and semantics. But careful, it's not this simple, not implemented this simply and clear-cutly in the brain. Again, if the left hemisphere is badly damaged, the right can take over and do a pretty good job, but not vice versa in reality. So how this is all implemented in the brain is quite a bit of study. So evolution is another interesting topic. Different YouTube I'm looking at here. Ask, what is the purpose of the unfolding of existence? He answers, a very important idea in this, a distinction. And this idea is in the chapter on time, for example. It can't be thought of as already there, as some static block universe. And let me get my static block universe. You just unfold it, like going through a catalog of pages, and you find what was there. Henry Bergson, early 20th century French philosopher, enormously rich mind and greatly underappreciated these days, gives the image of a lady's fan, which was an accoutrement of well-dressed women of that period. So they have a fan, and when you open the fan, there was a painting on it. It was there when it was closed. In the opening of it, there it is. So it's interesting here because the static block universe, as we've been discussing, there is no becoming. in the static block universe interpretation of FSR. And as he says, you're simply going through it, as it were, plane by plane, as though in those first three planes there, you'd have some sort of observer, that would be Felix, a disembodied consciousness, moving along the static block universe, just encountering plane after plane after plane. That is, it's all there already. It's just like in the other metaphor he uses, paging through a book like Homer is. In reality, you can't even make sense of this picture because in relativity, you don't have a plane of the universal present. You'd have different planes for every observer, and that particular picture falls into incoherence. But that's the best we can do with the block theory. As I said, there is no plane of the universal present. The static block, though, is only true if Langevin's twin paradox is accepted as an ontological effect, an actual physical effect with actual beards and gray hair and wrinkles versus a youth. Very real, very ontological difference between the two. Accepting these as ontological effects, then the relativity of simultaneity is a physical, ontological thing as well. That is, you end up with the block above there with those different planes of simultaneity. That's implied. There can be no becoming, but this all depends on Langevin. And I'm saying this because we're about to hit this problem. So he says the image I want to give, and what Bergson was getting at, is the image of something that's not pre-existing, that is not pre-existing, that only comes into existence in the process of coming into existence. It's unknowable beforehand. So this is all very Bergsonian. In fact, going to the next page, I put some of the Bergson quotes there, most of which are in my discussion of Bergson as time as a force. Time is a force, a real thing. So ask, what is the purpose of the unfolding of existence, he says. One way of thinking of it, that whatever this creative drive is, and it clearly is a creative drive. So I'll just put my note right there. McGilchrist is backing Bergson's discredited, unquote, unquote, elan vital, the underlying force of evolution. He's coming back to this. In different cultures, it's called things like Li, or in Chinese, it's called the Tao. It's called, and I couldn't quite pick up the word in there, but it's in the Vedic, something in the Vedic traditions. It's known as the Logos, as Allah. Whatever this creative force is that causes this complex and beautiful cosmos to unfold, I would say that that force is not something that we would base on the idea of a human being, just much, much grander, like a person with an almighty brain. It is a force that is actually constantly celebrating, discovering, delighting in, and further propagating whatever is within it to bring forth. And so it is like the massive, eternal, consistent realization of potential dreams and so forth that never stop flowing forth. So I just cannot impress enough that this is McGilchrist reiterating Bergson and creative evolution. So we come to time. A different interview. This one from McGilchrist channel, 22nd in that 25 long series. This on time, the time chapter in his book. And in this interview, Jan opens with this. Bergson says more clearly than anyone that it is a spatialization of time that denatures it and devitalizes the world. He makes it very clear that when you see time as it really is, as a process that is constantly changing, that change is the only constant. So in the little picture here of the classic metaphysic, which is the spatialization of time, those blocks, I wanted to note this, those blocks are instantaneous. That is, they have the time extent of a mathematical point, which is to say there is no change in each block. Therefore, they cannot transition from one block to the next, from 1 to 2 to 3. They're frozen. So you need some external force then, as it were, to create the next block after block. This is what Descartes saw. Bergson noted this, that physics, by the very logic of its metaphysic, is forced to admit continuous creation. That is, you might as well have, shall we say, a God creating the universe or something such. You're forced to that. So he goes on. It might be worth making a few comments on Bergson, because there's a lot of uninformed misconceptions about Bergson, as a result of which, until quite recently, he was very much neglected. And it's a bit of a puzzle because at the beginning of the century, he was probably the most important intellectual in the world. He won the Nobel Prize. He was more famous than Einstein. And when he lectured in New York, he was credited for causing the first traffic jam in New York. So this is all true. I'm not sure, because he says until quite recently he was very much neglected. I'm not sure who he's referring to that's not paying attention to him. In my opinion, there's not many following that dictum I initially started out with, tying him to the fact. I don't know of too many. In fact, virtually none. But perhaps more philosophers. I know some philosophers that are looking a bit at it, but I'm not clear what he's talking about. But to go on. And for some reason, because I think of the debate that took place between Einstein and Bergson in Paris in 1922, and it wasn't too much of a debate. It was Bergson giving comments and Einstein giving a comment, and that was it. For those interested in learning more, I do strongly recommend the book by Canales, The Physicist and the Philosopher, 2015. It tells the story that led up to it and what happened since. The almost deliberate concealing of the value of what Bergson was illustrating. In the latter half of the 20th century, people began to see that Bergson's grasp of physics was profound. Unfortunately, this book, The Physicist and the Philosopher, I've mentioned this before, obscures the essence of the debate. And McGilchrist wanders into the fog on the subject the book creates. Continuing. In any case, the point they were debating, Bergson didn't disagree in any way with what Einstein had to say. He was talking at a different level, not just about clock's time, but about phenomenological time. So he wasn't in conflict with Einstein, but Einstein seems to have misunderstood what Bergson was saying and said in a very dismissive way, quote, the time of the philosopher is unreal, unquote. But it could easily be said that the time of the clockmaker is unreal, and we have to juggle because of the way our brains are set up, different ways of thinking about it. No, Bergson did disagree. He disagreed, put it this way, he agreed with Einstein in the context of the logically consistent special relativity with which Einstein started. He heavily disagreed with the Langevin destroyed structure of relativity with which Einstein was agreeing. He was worried, therefore, about two things. The nature of time. Einstein's special relativity is simply the expression of the classic metaphysic. That is, it is a derivative from the brain's cognitive development. It has no positive reality. It does not have an actual status as an ontological thing. So it cannot be simply taken as just a different way of thinking about it. It's a different way of thinking about it, but its actual status has to be understood. And secondly, a problem in physics. In the context of the twin paradox, Einstein's agreement with Langevin, that is, that the twin on Earth actually physically is aging more, as in our picture there with the man on the Earth, the white hair, bent over, rheumatism, very physically aging, ontological thing happening, that this destroyed the logical consistent structure of SR, and therefore of physics, because SR is embroidered into the very fabric of physics now. So this is an extremely important question. So Bergson's argument, gone through it before, we'll run through it again. Einstein had embedded the Lorentz equations within a reciprocal system. Observer 1 can declare himself at rest. Observer 2 is in motion, and vice versa. So, for example, the rocket twin there, he thinks he's moving, but he couldn't think he's not moving. He can declare himself at rest, and therefore the Earth twin is moving away from him and then ultimately back again. It's reciprocal, and it's intrinsic, that reciprocity, to special relativity is integral. And as such, all effects in special relativity are measurement effects. A measurement effect. I measure my toaster. One ruler says 6 inches. The other says 9 inches. So the toaster seems to expand, depending on the ruler, from 6 inches to 9 inches, or contract. Obviously, this isn't a real contraction. It's a measurement effect, an effect of the rulers. In special relativity, the rulers are light rays and clocks. Clocks synchronized or not. For example, if observer 1 is seen as moving, they're not synchronized. If he's stationary, they're synchronized. Just as in the picture there, the guy in the green, the bottom, he says and thinks he's at rest. Therefore, the 2 lightning bolts hit simultaneously. They bounce off the mirrors, hit the clocks at exactly the same instant. The clocks are not synchronized at 3 o'clock. Another observer moving by or not moving by, depending on what he thinks, says, well, I'm at rest. The green guy's in motion. Therefore, in reality, he's moving toward the blue lightning bolt and away from the yellow lightning bolt, and therefore his clocks aren't simultaneous. The blue lightning bolt is hitting the clock first, then the yellow lightning bolt a little bit later. So his clocks aren't synchronized. So when we come to Michelson-Morley, this experiment was explained by special relativity as a measurement effect. That is, the apparatus arm laying in parallel with the ether current there is not actually physically shortening. It's a measurement effect. It's an effect of the rulers. Again, the rulers in the combination of light rays and clocks in special relativity are constant in actuality, just like in constant length, shall we say, just like the blue and yellow rulers are actually the same length, but they just differ in proportion of space and time units, or the proportion of space and time. But to see the full meaning of this, you have to have the reciprocity. So the ether was rejected on this basis of it being the Michelson-Morley experiment being a measurement effect. And the Lorentz's hypothesis that it was actually a real contraction was rejected, seeming to be ad hoc. So I am not sure that I even believe this explanation or story in physics anymore. I think there's just too much political history going on, but that's another question. So the Lorentz equations for time and distance, the 2 different equations, are compensatory. Time units expand as length units contract. Therefore, they have to be of the same order. And this has to be measurement effects. Particularly, it has to be measurement effects to explain Michelson-Morley. Else the explanation goes in the trash can. So special relativity cannot be used to explain real ontological time effects, like that twin aging more slowly or more rapidly, or clock slowing in jets. This is a misuse of special relativity. A new theory is needed for these effects. So McGilchrist's form of resolution, that is, Bergson and Einstein talking on different levels, is no resolution at all. It completely misses the problem. So Langevin warped interpretation of special relativity has really screwed up physics in many, many ways. Right? I couldn't count all the ways. They either have a false rejection of the ether or no explanation of the retardation of processes. That is, retardation of clocks slowing down, muon slowing down. That's just the beginning, but that's my either or. It's left us with a ridiculous block model of time. And it screwed up Bergson students as well, who don't understand this. If you side with Einstein, you may as well have thrown Bergson's model of perception and memory in the trash can, for it only works within his temporal metaphysic. That's got to sink in too. I'm kind of reacting because in Bergson-related literature, there's a chunk of articles siding with Einstein. Here's two. What Bergson should have said about special relativity. Synthesis. And another one. What Bergson should have said to Einstein, Bergsonia, both. Simply kowtowing to Einstein. Here's what Bergson should have said to save himself and look good. I submitted an article. Why Bergson was correct. I gave it first a synthesis. Both reviewers rejected it. Their main argument. Robbins is rejecting proven effects like clock slowing. It's like they have Trump derangement syndrome. They have SRDS, not TDS, SRDS. They become so infuriated they cannot read. That was the last slide. Special relativity cannot be used to explain real ontological time effects, like a twin aging more slowly, clock slowing, and misuse. A new theory is needed for these. I preceded that in the paper with this. I am not saying that effects like clock slowing in jets, half-leak or muons with longer lifespans via increased velocity do not exist. They indeed exist. Again, special relativity cannot be used to explain real ontological time effects, like clock slowing down. The critique. You're rejecting proven effects like clock slowing. There's severe psychological reactions going on with this stuff at this point. There were some other critiques, and they were equally dumb. In Bergsoniana, so I resubmitted it to Bergsoniana. The reviewers sat on it for 9 months. Normally it should be returned in a month or two with a decision. I withdrew the article. The Bergsonians are equally screwed up, scared of contradicting special relativity, Einstein, and physics. So, it's very important to cut through the mist and the fog and all this. For physics, for the theory of consciousness, for psychology. So continuing, the big critique of Bergson, and this is so ironic, is simply an urban myth, which is about the debate between Bergson and Einstein, in which some people think Bergson didn't understand Einstein. But I think Einstein didn't understand, unfortunately, Bergson. Because of that, it is thought that Bergson was anti-scientific. But I can't think of any philosopher in the last 150 years that was more thorough in his interest in knowledge and mathematics and physics. And remember, he was no slouch, Bergson was. He won a prestigious French prize in mathematics when he was 18. He took Einstein's relativity and broke down the equations into every single term in his Duration and Simultaneity book. So yes, maybe Einstein didn't understand Bergson and the implication of his temporal metaphysic. That I can go with. But this is my opinion. Einstein did understand Bergson's critique of special relativity as it was contorted by Langevin. That is, he knew that Langevin had contorted special relativity. He knew Bergson understood special relativity. Canales herself quotes Einstein responding to a letter from someone voicing the idea that, quote, Bergson does not understand special relativity. Einstein, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember it exactly, I have to go through that big thick book, but he said, oh, he understands it perfectly. Why didn't he admit this? I guess. He knew special relativity is not structured to explain real ontological effects, like the slowed clocks, the longer-lived muons. But his general theory, already well in place before the debate in 1922, which has nothing relative about it, by the way, general theory, has, or seems to have, because I would dispute that it actually can explain even this, a mechanism via gravitational effects. Einstein probably flatly explained it. So given this, he was willing to discard the reciprocity feature integral to special relativity. He was just going to say, sit back and let general relativity do the work. But where that leaves special relativity, The ether and the explanation of Michaels and Morley, a complete, total, and shameful mess. So continuing. McGilchrist says, yes. If I was asked which philosopher in the last 100 years is the most important to read, it would be Bergson. Despite the fact that there's been many other great ones, Wittgenstein, Heidegger, Merleau-Ponty, and so on, I would really say he is one of the most important. Yes. So I'm hoping that McGilchrist indeed has an impact. The AI folks are now claiming that their GPT model is the default model for what the brain is doing. I'm telling you, not just AI people in the OpenAI, but professors at Berkeley. This is absurd. I am wondering how their GPT is going to be split into the right brain and a left brain GPT. Could be interesting. Again, remember, they're claiming they're doing what the brain does. So I guess they better make it left brain than right brain. This is the answer to this stuff. Make Bergson great again. So next time we'll see. Till then, signing off.